It is now my pleasure to introduce to you three musicians from the Garfield High Combo Band. Enjoy their music. Thank you. What a great performance. Thank you. Our program today is about music, particularly music in the public schools. The Rotary Music for Life program began in Seattle and under the leadership of Dave Endicott is now a district project. To grow these projects, it needs support and expertise. And I would like to recognize our members Ken Schubert and Akane Suzuki for embracing this project and supporting this important work. If you could please stand. Akane is the lead attorney at Garvey Schubert on the Rotary Music for Life program. Joining her and Ken today are Teresa Simpson and our member Dick Seifert, also from the Garvey staff. Could you join me in saying thank you to Garvey Schubert and particularly to these individuals for the terrific job they're doing for our program. It is now my pleasure to welcome to the podium the Chief Academic Officer for the Seattle Public Schools, Carlos Antero, who will introduce to you Seattle's very own Music Man.
I am pleased to be here today to help the Seattle Rotary recognize and honor a great American educator, Clarence Acox.
I'm going to move this microphone far away because I'm told, Clarence, you don't need a microphone. First off, I want to introduce the young people who just played for you because they're special in their own right. And I think you need to know something about these kids. They're all 12th graders at Garfield High School. The bass player is Colleen Gilligan. Colleen. Colleen has been involved in the program ever since her 9th grade year, and she comes from that fabulous Washington Middle School band program that many of you are familiar with. My friend and brother for many years ran that, Robert Knapp. The young man on the piano is Ben Hamaji. Ben Hamaji. Ben had a sister that played in the jazz band at Garfield, and she graduated, went on to UCLA, and she's one of the top jazz piano players at UCLA. And she graduated, and he came and took her chair. So he has been quite busy at Garfield. This tall guy got a haircut, and I told him this morning when I saw it, I said, man, because he's a swimmer also, a champion swimmer. I said, you You look just like Michael Phelps. A month ago, that would have been a great thing. But that has changed. But he's a champion swimmer. He's qualified to go to state. Now listen to this. This kid is 17 years old, and I want you to tell me if you've ever heard of a 17-year-old that had a senior year like this. Starting at the Central Ellington competition last year, he was voted, well, he received the Ella Fitzgerald Soloist Award. Now, I don't know if you know what that is. That's the highest award you can receive at the Essential Ellington competition for his solo work on tenor saxophone and clarinet. But don't clap yet. In September, he was featured with the Seattle Symphony as a guest of Marvin Hamlish on clarinet. The week before that, he was playing to a sold-out audience at McCaw Hall with George Duke. 2 weeks after he was featured with Marvin Hamlish, he was flown out to New York City to be featured with the Lincoln Center Jazz Orchestra on clarinet and tenor saxophone. All three of these young people will be competing at the Lionel Hampton Jazz Festival next week with the Garfield Jazz Ensemble and as soloists. So these are some phenomenal young musicians that I'd love for you to show them some love. Hey, now you can sit down. Just sit down. Yeah. You can have a seat. Now, wherever I go, people want to know what is happening in Seattle that consistently, year after year after year, we have so many groups that qualify for the Essential Ellington competition. And I get this question all the time. What is going on? Now, in New York, they think this is some kind of phenomenon. But to us, it's not a phenomenon because we've been knowing about this in Seattle for many years. But because of this Essential Ellington competition, everybody in the rest of the nation is starting to take notice of what's happening in Seattle. And I just want to share some things with you. And I want to first, before I do that, I want to thank Laura Rehrman, who invited me here, along with Dave Endicott. I know they're sitting somewhere here in the audience. I want to thank them very much for inviting me, and I really appreciate it coming because it's groups like this where we need support in the Seattle schools, and not only just the Seattle schools, but all the other schools. But I just want to spend just a moment just to talk about some of the reasons, and these are my perceptions as to why we have done so well in national competitions year after year after year. I think one thing about Seattle is that it has always been a great arts town. We have more performing arts companies, theater companies in Seattle per capita than any city in the United States. Now, of course, there's New York, which is more of a cultural center. But we're talking about schools of cities of comparable size. There's no city that can compare to Seattle. That's one thing that I think. Now, there was a time in the late 80s and early 90s where we got a lot of people that moved up here from California. And everybody said, oh, the California people are moving up here, the California people. But there was one good byproduct of people from California moving up here. A lot of those people that came here were people that came with refined taste. They were educated people. And then all of a sudden you saw all these coffee houses popping up. Well, you had jazz vocalists, and even Starbucks took off, you know. They're more of a jazz company now. So a lot of that has to do with the people that make up this area, this city that we live in called Seattle, Washington. But there's another component to that, and that's the history of jazz in Seattle itself. And I'm going to just spend just a few moments, and I'm not going to take most of your time because I know we want to keep things moving. But I'm going to give you some timelines to show you what led up to where we are right now in the Seattle area as far as being a good jazz town. In the early 90s, jazz came to Seattle when many blacks moved up here from the South and the Midwest. And this is typical of all northern cities during that time, African Americans were moving up north for looking for a better way of life. Well, a lot of African Americans came here, and with that brought the culture and the mindset of jazz in Seattle. In 1916, Prohibition in Washington State jump-starts the speakeasy culture on Jackson Street. Now, I don't know how many of you are familiar with Paul DeBarris' book, Jackson Street After Hours. I don't know if you've read that. If you have not read it, it's great Seattle history, and we should know about that because that was the center of activity as far as jazz in the Seattle area. And because of the speakeasy operations that were going on and Prohibition, jazz flourished. Now, a lot of times people tend to look down on jazz because it started in such dire straits. But, I mean, some of the best musicians or the best music in the world came from those type of situations. And you had many people that were very much involved in that, and it's jump-started the jazz movement. During the 40s and the 50s, mid-50s, we had a lot of jazz going on. There were a lot of clubs, and a lot of those clubs were clubs like the 908 Club, the Rocking Chair, the Showbox, the Black and Tan Club, which brought a lot of national artists. I know Luther Carr is back there. I see him sitting at the table. He knows about all those. The Washington Social Club, the Black Elks, the Savoy Ballroom, the one in Seattle, the Club Maynard, Basin Street, the New Chinatown. All these clubs had jazz going on, and this is more or less a golden era of jazz in Seattle. But some of the people that performed in these clubs are people like Floyd Stanifer, who I worked with for many years at the New Orleans Creole Restaurant. He passed about 2 years ago. Many consider Floyd the grandfather of jazz in Seattle because he represented everything that was good about jazz music. He was very intelligent. He was a marvelous player. He could articulate what the music was about. And he always played a very high level of music, but it was never over anybody's head. If there's one thing that jazz musicians are criticized for, it's such a high level of music that they tend to play above people's heads. Floyd never did that. As a result, he led the band at the New Orleans Creole Restaurant that I am a part of, and to this day, for over 20 years. In May, we will be celebrating 23 years of playing at the New Orleans Creole Restaurant. I'm just telling you that. Thank you. I'm just telling you that so you can know what this meant. Another gentleman by the name of Ray Charles. We all know what happened when Ray Charles left here. He became an international figure, marvelous pianist, singer, composer. We know about Ray Charles. Started right here in the Seattle area. Ernestine Anderson, Garfield graduate, internationally known. To this day, she's 80 years old, and she still flies all over the country and does concerts. She was on the scene then. Buddy Catlett, a bass player who played with the Count Basie Orchestra, was Louis Armstrong's last bassist. All those albums with the Count Basie band that Frank Sinatra recorded, Buddy Catlett is on those recordings. A few years ago, I played a gig with Buddy Catlett, and the bride and the groom wanted nothing but Frank Sinatra music played at their wedding. And Buddy Catlett was in the band. And so I happened to walk over to the bride. I said, do you realize that the music you're playing is that man right over there on bass? He's playing on all those recordings. That girl almost fainted. I had to hold her up. She couldn't believe it. Buddy Catlett, who went on and made a name for himself in the Seattle area. Then there was a gentleman by the name of Quincy Delight Jones. You ever heard of him? I know of no person in the United States that had more of an influence on popular music in all different levels than Quincy Jones. He was an arranger, composer, producer, entrepreneur. He has done it all. Started right here in Seattle, Washington, in that Jackson Street After Hours scene. So I'm setting up something that's leading up to what's happening today. All these people were very much a part of it. Now, in the 60s, something happened. Because the advent of rock and roll and the Beatles and some other popular music, jazz kind of took a back seat. And those same people that I just mentioned, Ernestine Anderson, Quincy Jones, Ray Charles, they all left to make names for themselves in the music world. They all left. As a result, the jazz scene died. But there was one thing that happened that nobody noticed at the beginning. There was a gentleman by the name of Waldo King at Garfield High School that started what they used to call back during that time a stage band. We call them jazz bands or jazz ensembles. Waldo King started the first jazz band, and as I said before, they called it stage band, at Garfield High School in 1960. And what happened was, later on, other schools started taking the torch and playing jazz music. You had Waldo left Garfield, went to Roosevelt High School, started the program at Roosevelt High School. We all know about Roosevelt. There were other schools, people like Hal Sherman at Kent Meridian High School, nationally recognized jazz program. Leo Dodd at Interlake High School, nationally known. So as a result, what happened was, because of the high school jazz bands and the late 90s, essentially Ellington happening, where all these bands from Seattle started getting accepted into essentially Ellington, then all of a sudden now you have this resurgence of jazz, started right at the schools. So, ladies and gentlemen, when I tell you that we need to support kids in schools, I'm talking to you from experience. This is no time in our society for us to be turning our back on kids. Kids need as much help and support as they can get during these times. I do not know if I'd want to be a kid growing up nowadays. I do not know, because when I was going to school, it was so much simpler. We went out, we went to parties, we had fun, we went to dances. We weren't worrying about people shooting us. It's a little different now. So what I'm saying is that groups like this, who have committed themselves to help schools, and I'm not just talking about just music programs, it affects me personally because I'm a musician and I've been teaching in the Seattle school district for longer than some of you people have been on the planet. But I can speak from that source with a much clearer voice. So what has happened, the history of what went before in Seattle, with the Jackson Street After Hours, the fact that we had people that moved to the Seattle area with refined tastes, the fact that the high school jazz band programs, and vocal jazz as well, because there were people like Mowat, once again Waldo King, Curtin Marcy, all these people were very instrumental in that. As a result of those three components, and this is my assessment, we have moved to a level that is unprecedented in the United States of America when it comes to jazz music, and a lot of it has to do with people like you. So when I had this opportunity to come and speak to you, you know, I relished it, was a little nervous. Carlos Santano is introducing me, and I mean, if that doesn't make you nervous, I don't know. But I want to say that kids need your help, and whenever you have an opportunity to support kids and to support schools, please do it, because they need you now more than ever. I want to thank you very much for inviting me to speak. Thank you. You want question and answers now? Question and answers now? Okay.
We have some time for some questions and answers. The mic is on the way.
Is it realistic? Is it time for us to bring that competition to Seattle and give New York a run for its money?
That's a question that's been asked of me before, and I got to be totally honest with you. We could do it, but I tell you, the kids enjoy going to New York.
Clarence, first of all, you didn't mention Billy Tolles. He was back here in the 50s, late 50s, and he's left the city to, I think it's Denver and other places. He's a wonderful player, sax player, and I want to congratulate you for the program and for your Sunday program that's on radio, I think. Keep up the good work.
Thank you. I just want to say something about you. You mentioned Billy Tolles, and let me just say right now, there were a lot of people that I left out, and Billy Tolles is one of those people that started right here in the Seattle area, marvelous instrumentalist, marvelous entertainer, and he was very much a part of that scene too. And I remember one of the last performances he did before he died, he came to New Orleans and sat in with us, and it was pure joy. So with a foundation like that, we can't help but do well. God, it's so many times. Let me think about this. I know Roosevelt has won it 3 times, the first place prize. Garfield has won it twice, but we've all been to the competition. It started in 1999, and since that time, we have represented Seattle even more than New York, Los Angeles, or the larger schools. But to be honest with you, they've had so much participation from Seattle. I can't give you an exact number, but it has dominated the festival more than any locale in the nation. And Garfield and Roosevelt has pretty much been at the forefront. Right here, Seattle School Group, right here, has been at the forefront of not only the movement for Seattle schools, but the nation.
Thanks so much for your leadership and for your example. It makes a big difference. And when you ask us to help, could you get some specifics on that? What are things that groups like ours can do? You know, we're a little older than these youngsters up there, and we don't necessarily relate to them like you do. You got the day-to-day experience in there. What else can we do?
Well, thanks to the internet, you can look up garfieldjazz.org, and we have a gala that we have annual, and this year we're going to Europe on our 9th European tour, and so that's going to be a major event, but not just for Garfield, but also you can go to Roosevelt's website, and they're giving concerts all the time where you can come and support. Just you being at the performances, showing up and bringing other people to the performances can help tremendously too. And when you're at those events, you can also make donations. If you have a group that would love to make donations to either one of the jazz programs, you can do it at that time as well. But just go online. You know, we're in the age of cyberspace. You can go online and find out anything. Ms. Santerno brought up stuff I had forgotten about.
Didn't one of our high school bands go to Montreux last year?
Did what?
One of our high school bands went to Montreux last year, Jazz Festival in Europe.
Oh, yeah. We've been 8 times, and Roosevelt's been 8 times. Let me just say this. We've done, as I said, 8 tours, and this will be our 9th tour. And each one of those tours, we perform at the Montreux Jazz Festival, and in addition to Roosevelt as well. The first year we went, which was 1991, Quincy Jones was the producer. He conducted the Garfield Jazz Ensemble at a chalet way in the mountains overlooking Montreux, and that was the 25th anniversary of the Montreux Jazz Festival. So what that did is started other high school bands to going to the Montreux Jazz Festival. But that's just one. We've done the Umbria Jazz Festival, the North Sea Jazz Festival. We've done the Vienne Jazz Festival in South France. We performed in Paris. We perform in Germany. We're going back to Perugia. Oh, if you've never been to Perugia, you got to go to Perugia. You know, usually when it's interesting going to those different countries. In the United States, I look like James Earl Jones. Everywhere I go, it's James Earl Jones. And I want you to know, a year ago, I met him right here in this room, and we were standing up talking and shaking hands, and all the cameras came out because they were trying to figure out who was who. But last time we went to the Montreux Jazz Festival in Switzerland, it was another one. It was Colin Powell. I said, Colin Powell? I said, at least it's not Charles Manson. So we're going back to Perugia again this year.
Clarence, could you talk a little bit about the SRJO, which is populated by many of the educators in the community who run these jazz bands for high schools?
Talk about the educators?
The SRJO.
SRJO. That's a board member from SRJO. When I first moved to Seattle, what I wanted to do, I had this dream of starting this group and modeling it after the Seattle Symphony, the Los Angeles Symphony, the San Francisco. And what I wanted to do is have a group of jazz musicians that had the same thing, present theme concerts, focus on different composers in jazz history, invite young people to concerts, just like Leonard Bernstein used to do in New York City. And that was a dream of mine. And I played in a band called Roadside Attraction, and we used to do the Ellington Sacred Concert for about 3 or 4 years, and the leader of the group decided he didn't want to do it anymore. So Michael Brockman, who's professor of saxophones at the University of Washington, we had always talked about starting a repertory group. So in 1995, we started the Seattle Repertory Jazz Orchestra. And what we've done is just what I said we've done. We focus on different composers, different musicians, highlighted their music, talked about people, bring new artists that people, the masses, may not be familiar with, bring them to those audiences, and as a result, we've built our audience. We've done young people's concerts where we have, and that, to be honest with you, those are the things that I love more than anything, the young people's concert, when you see kids, and they ask the greatest questions. You wouldn't think those kids would ask such poignant questions, like, how come you play so long? Why do you play so loud? How come you don't have any girls in the band? But SRJO is one of 4 repertory groups in the nation. There are only a few. Lincoln Center Jazz Orchestra, the Columbus Jazz Orchestra, Seattle Repertory Jazz Orchestra, and one other. There are no other repertory groups in the United States. This is something, once again, that started right in Seattle, where you live. Thank you.
It is with a great deal of appreciation that I present to you, on behalf of the entire membership of the Rotary Club of Seattle, a Paul Harris Fellowship, the highest honor we can give. Your work in Seattle has not only been a gift of music to generations of students, but your music has enriched the community and changed it forever. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Beautiful. Beautiful. Thank you.
Thanks to all of the participants in today's program. Next week, the 25th of February, we meet at the Convention Center. We will have a tribute to a second centennial sponsor, Home Street Bank, and the Williams family. We will also have a visit from the District Governor, Jesse Tan, who will present us with our centennial proclamation from Rotary International. Our main program will be from Mayor Nichols. He will be following up his State of the City address with comprehensive plans and how he is going to be running the city. Come prepared with your questions. We'll make sure there's plenty of time for you to ask him. We will be anticipating a sizable crowd, and there will be theater-style seating in the back of the room as the mayor begins his speaking at 1 p.m. Special thanks to President-elect Tim Bandocas for taking the helm last week. I was in Zambia, where I saw firsthand the challenges and stresses of life in Africa. During my visit, I was astonished by the need and equally touched by the spirit of the people, the enthusiasm for life, and the joy in their community, even though they live with amazing challenges every day. In the midst of all the obstacles, there was Rotary working to provide solutions. Zambia has 18 Rotary clubs, and I was privileged to be able to meet with many of these dedicated Rotarians. These men and women have built schools literally brick by brick in the poorest of neighborhoods, where the student-teacher ratio is 1 teacher to 80 students. Local Rotary clubs have also built health clinics, the only health care available for miles and miles, and the only means of getting to these health clinics is on foot. The saddest and yet perhaps the most essential work that many of these Rotary clubs do are building and supporting orphanages. As happy and bright-eyed as these children appear in the pictures, the sobering fact is that 1 in 5 children will not live 60 months. Malaria is a disease of the most vulnerable, the very young, the poor, the pregnant, the elderly, and the sick. The statistics that are so sobering can be changed, and we have seen proof that by simply adding a bed net to a home and instructing the family to sleep under a bed net can make dramatic differences. In Zambia, for example, bed nets have reduced the incidence of malaria by 70%. In the weeks ahead, you will be hearing more. Rotary's power to change these statistics is important. We need to take the lessons that we have learned from polio and support that work as we near the finish line and completely eradicate polio, but not stop for one moment, not relax. Take those lessons, take those strategies, and apply them to the eradication of malaria. Once you see the hope on those faces, you will know that the eradication of polio is not just an opportunity, it's an obligation. Please let me know your thoughts. We need to create a plan. We need to wipe out malaria. So we will see you next week at the Convention Center with the mayor. And as you leave today, be sure to fill out your cards for the Centennial Dinner and give them to Todd and Larry on the way out. We are adjourned.
Seattle Rotary Online is made possible in part by a grant from First Choice Health, working with the Washington Health Information Collaborative to use technology to bring better health care to patients throughout the Pacific Northwest. First Choice Health.